universe is looking at itself. Only it is so arranged that we don't know that in exactly the same way as we don't look directly at our own eyes.
Welcome to Being in the Way, the Alan Watts podcast, and I'm your host, Mark Watts. And today we're going to hear a talk that was recorded in 1972, on December 13th, at the New College of Sausalito. The title is Landscape, Soundscape in Painting, Music, and Mystical Vision. It's a delightful look at the arts, aesthetics, and Buddhist and Taoist philosophy. So here's Alan Watts at the New College in Landscape, Soundscape in Painting, Music, and Mystical Vision.
Now let me see. This was announced as Landscape, Soundscape in Painting, Music, and Mystical Vision. That was what it was to be about. Now you realize that for perhaps thousands of years, the art of painting and the art of sculpture were iconographic. That is to say, they served mainly religious purposes. There was no such thing as what we now call fine art. All art was sort of functional and made objects to serve supports for contemplation or for ritual or magical purposes. And so if you go to a museum of any kind of ancient art, almost everything that you will see will be something of religious or magical function. And these consist principally of effigies of human or divine animal figures. In painting, of course, you cannot see a figure without a background. And as a matter of fact, that's also true of sculpture, but we consider the background in sculpture irrelevant because it is not something which the artist himself has created. It's the temple or museum or place in which it is shown. But when you paint, and especially when you paint on a rectangular surface, instead of a surface that is shaped along with the figure, so that the outline of the figure is also the frame, when you paint, you have to put in some kind of a background. Now, if you've seen Greek or Russian icons, the background is solid gold, often emblazoned with jewels. But as time went on, painters began to put landscape in the background, because that's the way you see people. They must be against something. And in due course, Western painters began to be fascinated with the background. And they said to the figure, move over. And then there were landscapes. But of course, the people who looked at them and weren't used to this kind of thing said, well, that's not what I call a painting. But in time, they got used to it. So used to it that, in fact, in every national park, you will find a place called Inspiration Point, where there's a great view. Everybody wants a room with a view. And when all the tourists from Kansas and Iowa get there, they say, oh, it's just like a picture. That's a very mysterious thing that's happening here. What was it that intrigued painters about mountains, trees, clouds, and rivers? Why did they feel they were beautiful? Why suddenly did they get this vision that these were things that were worth copying? Now, painters were falling in love with the non-symmetrical. Now, the human form although wiggly, is more or less symmetrical. We look as if we've been folded down the middle because we have an eye on either side, 2 ears. Some of us part our hair in the middle, and there are 2 arms, 2 legs, although we're not symmetrical inside. 2 testicles, 2 breasts, or whatever you may be equipped with, but you do look pretty symmetrical. But clouds don't. Then there's another thing. We worry about our behavior a great deal. And we talk about good behavior and bad behavior, sane behavior and crazy behavior, and artificial behavior and natural behavior. And we are into a big thing about this. But the painter doesn't worry about the behavior of clouds or of spraying water or rocks. It would be unimaginable to accuse a wave of making an aesthetic mistake. Nobody has ever, I think, in history, drawn an objection to a badly formed cloud. And only once in history was there a complaint about the stars. And this was a Frenchman in the 18th century who criticized the good Lord for not arranging the stars in fine geometrical patterns that would be edifying to the intellect, but had instead scattered them at random across the sky. That was the period when people were making formal gardens, were making tulips form 4s, and were clipping trees and hedges in a very formal topiary work, so that trees looked like birds and sundials and all sorts of things. And the garden was laid out in squares. And this is a very curious thing, because we still tend to do that to some extent. When you fly across the United States from San Francisco to New York, you encounter first a long stretch of mountain country where human beings must perforce accord with nature, except in some parts of Nevada and Utah. But by and large, all our roads are curly because they have to go along mountain valleys. There are curly rivers and wonderful washes, which interestingly enough are in the form of trees. The river and the tree are the same shape. So they're really fascinating. I mean, they go different directions. The tree goes up and the river goes down. But actually, a tree flows up because there's a flow of sap. And the flow of liquid is the flow of life. If you study water flow, you get what is really basic to nature. There's a marvelous book about this by Theodor Schwenk, and it's called Sensitive Chaos, and it's published by the Rudolf Steiner House in London. And it is a series of photographs with commentary of the way in which water flows under all sorts of conditions. And then it goes on that to patterns of fire, which are essentially the same, but flowing up. And then to patterns of the grain in wood, which are, as it were, a sculpture memorializing the flow of water. Then to patterns of bones, of muscle, and finally to human painting. Abstract painting in particular, the painting of the arabesque and Celtic illumination, where everything is based on the patterns of the flow of water. Blood is basically water, a little thicker. I mean, after all, you are 90% water. And that is really miraculous. Yes, but it's the water, it is the gravitational flow of water that is the life in us all. Energy is gravity, and that is the real meaning of E equals mc squared. So, Lao Tzu, writing a little before 400 BC, pointed out that the course of nature, the Tao, is like water, in that, although being extremely soft, it overcomes all hard things, and it being weak is extremely strong, and that it always seeks the lowest level which men abhor. And especially in our culture, to go with nature, to take the line of least resistance, is considered unmanly, weak-kneed, spineless, and altogether wrong. And we are all brought up to be energetic. That is to say, to use force. And then if anyone who isn't using force, say in school, is reported on by the teachers as lacking aggression and not being upstanding. This is really very weird. And I adjure you, in thinking about human affairs, always call common sense in question. It is the most creative path in philosophy. Take ideas which are commonly accepted and which seem to be incontrovertible and question them. Turn them backwards and see what would happen if they were thought about the other way. I give you an example. Everybody automatically assumes that the present is the result of the past. Turn it round and consider whether the past may not be the result of the present. Whether the past may not be streaming back from now, like the contrail of a plane. And then if you look at it that way, it all makes sense. Only you see that just as the tail doesn't wag the dog, the past doesn't cause the present, unless you insist that it does. And then, then that's your trip. But actually, the whole universe emerges from the present right now. It's all beginning now. We are present at this moment, at the beginning of creation. And the past is echoes going back. Echoes in the corridors of your mind. And the past is in fact present. That is to say, in terms of monuments that survive now, in terms of memories that survive now, and so on, books, other records. Because you see, the universe is a vibration. Although it seems to us to be still, and something like a rock, like Mount Tamalpais, has been around for a long time, but we are not normally aware of the fact that Tamalpais is an extremely fast vibration. So fast that we can't see the intervals between the vibrations, because the retina retains impressions in such a way that when you see a light going at 60 cycles, you can't see the intervals between the cycles, the on-off. But you can with an arc light, and when you listen to an extremely deep sound, you can hear the rattle in it. When you get down to
One of the coolest things to me was action is a character.
To claim to be that is to introduce democracy into the kingdom of heaven, to usurp divine authority, and to speak in its name without proper authorization. And they asked Jesus, by what authority do you speak? Of heaven or of men? And he was tricky about answering that one. He said, by what authority did John the Baptist speak? And they were nervous about answering that one. He could have asked, by what authority did Isaiah speak, etc., or Moses. But Moses became official authority. And if you could wangle it, that what you said was simply an extension of what Moses said, because Rabbi so-and-so said it, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Moses, then it's okay. Notice this, that to be an authority today in the academic world depends on documentation. It's not enough to say, for I say unto you, you must put in your footnotes. And the more the footnotes, the more the authority, obviously. So, Our dissertations tend to be books about books, about books about books, and our libraries multiply by mitosis. So, when somebody speaks as an authority, that means speaks as the author. That's all it means. It's a statement of which you are the author, and therefore for which you assume responsibility. That is to speak with authority. And to be original is likewise not to be freaky, but to speak from the origin. That is what Christians mean when they say to speak in the Spirit, to have your mouth possessed by the Holy Spirit, as they believe the mouth of Jesus was possessed by the Holy Spirit. So the gospel of Jesus, which of course was hushed up from its inception, was that wake up everybody and find out who you are. Asking that, again in the Gospel of St. John, they, pointing to his disciples, may be one, even as you, Father, and I are one. And when he was accused of blasphemy, the Jews took up stones to stone him, you know. And he said, many good works have I shown you from the Father, and from which of these do you stone me? And they said, for a good work we don't stone you, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself God. Now listen to the reply. He said, is it not written in your law, I have said ye are gods? And if that is what the scripture says, it can't be denied. So why do you tell me I blaspheme because I say I am a son of God? No answer. Because I said I am a son of God. It doesn't say that in your King James translation. It says I am the son of God. And you'll see the italicized, and you will think that that is for emphasis if you don't realize that passages in italics in the King James Bible are interpolations by the translators. So, son of, in Hebrew and in Arabic, means of the nature of. When we call someone a son of a bitch, we mean bitchy. And so if you call someone a son of God, you mean divine. Of the nature of God. As the Nicene Creed subsequently defined it, he is of one substance with the Father. But what happened was that this being blasphemy for the Jews, it became blasphemy for the Christians, for anyone else than Jesus to say it. They said, okay, baby, it's what's so with you, but there it stops. No more of this business. And as a result of that, Jesus was made irrelevant by pedestalization, by being kicked upstairs. In spite of the fact that he said, greater works than these that I do shall you do. Oh no, upstairs with you, baby, because we just can't have that sort of thing going on in a monarchical universe. We're not going to have democracy in the kingdom of heaven. So, this is why the gospel is impossible. Because we're supposed to follow the example of Christ. Where he says, for example, be not anxious for the morrow. Do not worry about what you shall eat, what you shall drink, and what you shall wear. God will take care of you. Doesn't he take care of the birds? Don't the flowers grow? They're wonderful. They're crazy. They're great. What are you worrying about? I've never heard a sermon preached on that. Never. Because it's totally subversive. The economy would crash. So they say, oh yes, that's all very well, but he was the boss's son. See, he had that colossal advantage. Take up your cross and follow him. Hey, but wait a minute. I don't know I'm going to be resurrected 3 days later. do all those miracles. He had an unfair advantage. So how can you ask us to follow the example of Christ? But supposing he didn't have an unfair advantage. Supposing that what was true about Jesus as a Son of God is true of us. Only a few of us know it. And we are pretty careful to be quiet about it, lest the same thing happen to us as happened to Jesus. And indeed it often does. And you know, you get these people from Arkansas or Texas or anywhere in the Bible Belt who never heard of the Upanishads. And they have this cosmic consciousness experience. And they realize that that's what happened to Jesus. They say, I'm Jesus, come back. Well, everybody says to them, you aren't Jesus. It's pretty obvious you're not Jesus. You just Joe Dokes. Well, he says that's what they said about Jesus. He has a perfect argument, except they say you're not much of a Jesus. They say, all right, if you're Jesus, command that these stones be made bread. And he says, a wicked and deceitful generation seeketh for a sign, and there shall no sign be given. Now, why talk about this? Is it interesting? Is it important for the human being to realize that in some sense of the word, whatever it means, he is God or one with God, as is plainly taught by the Hindus?
What up, Nikki? Hello. I'm playing Alan Watts. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great.
Are you just saying that, or do you really feel it?
No, I feel great.
Do you
I
feel?
feel wonderful.
Do you feel it in your plums, deep in your soul?
Yeah, I feel that every day.
You do?
Yes, every single day.
Well, how do you know?
See, when you enlighten at your highest consciousness, you feel that way every day. Don't nothing get you down, because everything around you becomes faint.
If you say so.
Hinted at by the Buddhists, only they don't like to put it out as a concept, in case people will use the concept as an idol to hang on to. They want you to find out for yourself and not believe in it. And certainly the Taoists understand it, the Sufis understand it, a lot of people understand it. But so what? Well, the importance of it is this, that to know that you are God is another way of saying that you feel completely with this universe. You feel profoundly rooted in it and connected with it. You feel, in other words, that the whole energy which expresses itself in the galaxies is intimate. It is not something to which you are a stranger, but it is that with which you, whatever that is, are intimately bound up. That in your seeing, your hearing, your talking, your thinking, your moving, you express that which it is which moves the sun and other stars. And if you don't know that, if you don't feel that, well, naturally you feel alien, you feel a stranger in the world, and if you feel a stranger, you feel hostile. And therefore, you start to bulldoze things about, to beat it up, and to try and make the world submit to your will, and you become a real troublemaker. So I feel also one reason why you become hostile is the feeling that you were just brought into this place. That your father and mother went up to some monkey business that they probably shouldn't have done, or it was bad rubber goods, and as a result of this, here you are, and you didn't ask to be here. Well, you always feel you can turn around and blame them. You can blame somebody. You can blame the government. You can blame the rascals. You can blame the cheaters. Always supposing you yourself aren't a rascal, which is a long odds. You always can blame someone and say, I didn't ask for it. Take it away. And yet, very few people are all too ready to take it away. Camus said that the only serious philosophical problem is whether or not to commit suicide. And if you don't say take it away, what are you going to do? You've really got to assume responsibility for it. You've got to say yes to what happens. It's my karma. And that doesn't mean merely, there are many misinterpretations of the doctrine of karma. It's usually and popularly understood that what happens to you, either fortunate or unfortunate, is the result of good or bad deeds in a previous life. Well, that's popular superstition. The real meaning of karma, the word in Sanskrit means simply doing. And if I say of an event, it is your karma, it is saying it is your doing. So the exposition, a book which would expound karma, would be not so much a whodunit as a youdunit. But that seems fantastic. Now, therefore, what I propose we do is that we, instead of just ideologizing, we have a clinical experience. You know, in psychiatric school, medical school, it's very usual for a doctor to bring a patient out in front of the students and talk with the patient as a kind of demonstration. He says, I want you to recognize the difference between a psychopath and a manic depressive or a schizophrenic or something. They don't know what all these things mean. And especially the schizophrenia. And so he has a dialogue with the patient right there. So let us suppose that I'm the patient, and you are the students and the doctors. And I suffer from what you would call the delusion that I'm God. And therefore, you might want to do something about me, or with me, or humor me, or ask me questions. And so I'm perfectly willing to submit to your examination and your treatment, and invite you to help yourselves.
When did you become God?
Now.
Will you marry me?
No. Yes.
You sleep on your stomach or your back?
Sleeping is like politics. One sleeps on the right side, and then when you're tired of that, you sleep on the left. When you're tired of that, you sleep on your back. And when you're tired of that, you sleep on your stomach. And it is thus that the world goes round.
If you were God now, what were you yesterday?
Now, you don't become God.
Am I also God?
Yes.
Are we then the same person?
No.
What is
Remember, 3 persons, but 1 God.
God, could you tell us a little about Satan?
Could I tell you a little bit about Satan? Yes. Although the matter is a little esoteric, but I told you all about it in the book of Job, where you will see that in the court of heaven, Satan is the district attorney. He is not, as Christians imagine, the enemy of heaven and the enemy of mankind. He's merely the person who sees the bad side of things and carries out the dirty work. And therefore, he saw Job and wondered whether Job really was as great a guy as he seemed to be, and suggested that God should appoint a committee of investigation to find out. And the committee did its work very thoroughly, but the case went against Satan because it was proved in the end that Job was an honorable man. Now you notice that although we pay the salary of the district attorney, whenever there's a great criminal case before the public eye, people begin to take the side of the underdog. And the prosecutor always has less public sympathy than the defense, except in political trials. On the right hand of God, and you know the defense is always on the right hand of the judge in court, is our only mediator and advocate, which is the phrase referring to Jesus Christ our Lord. So there is the defense, and there is the prosecution. And it is the function of Satan to be the prosecutor. There is a good deal more to it than that, because before all this started, as in a stage play, there was an arrangement in the green room before coming on stage, in which certain things were understood, but that are only to be revealed when the curtain goes down at the end of the play.
Is Job God too?
Yes, but he doesn't know it.
God, why do you hide from the sight of so many?
Why do you hide? It's for the same reason you're hiding. Yes. Who else? What? Man has free will to the extent that he knows who he is. Not otherwise. Where I got it from. Yes. To the extent that she knows who she is, yes.
Man has free will to know just what he is, and man is God. Then you'd say that you are no more than any God in this room, or any man.
That is correct. I'm no more God than any of you.
Then you only have the power to know who you are.
Well, that is saying quite a bit, yes.
What is not God?
What is not God? There is nothing that is not God.
You learn who you are.
It's like waking up from a dream. After a while, one's experience begins to have what I would call a haven't we been here before feeling. Going round and round and round. And then you begin wondering, where am I going? And to answer that question, you have to try and find out what you want. And so I went into that very thoroughly. What do I want to happen? And, of course, as soon as you ask yourself that, you begin to fantasize. And our amazing technology is, of course, an expression of human desire for power, for what we want to achieve. So I simply set myself to thinking through how far we could go. And so I soon found myself at a great push-button place, where I had a fantastic mechanism with buttons available for every conceivable thing I could wish. So I spent quite a bit of time playing with those. And science fiction wasn't in it. You know, you go going like that, and here is Cleopatra. And so on, you know, and then press this button, symphonic music in 4-channel sound, 16-channel sound, anything, you know, all possible pleasures are available. And when, you know, you're like everybody's dream of the Sultan in the palace, you suddenly notice there's a button labeled surprise. You push that, and here we are. Yes, boredom is, of course, the problem. Boredom is the other side of creativity. And the energy of creation has that is the yang, the yin side of that energy is called boredom. Everything, of course, is fundamentally yang and yin. If you understand that, you really don't need to understand anything else.
As God, what responsibility do you feel to ameliorate evil in the world?
As God, what responsibility do I feel to ameliorate evil in the world? I begin with the point that I am responsible for the way the world is. If I couldn't feel that, I'd have to blame somebody else. I'm not willing to do that, because I know that under various changing circumstances, it might be appropriate for me to be as big a rascal as rascals have been. Now, as to improving the world is always improving. It may look to some people slow, but it's improving even when it is declining, because the world works in an undulatory process, like a wave. It goes up and it goes down, it goes up and it goes down. And it couldn't go up all the time, because if it did, we wouldn't know that that was up. So it goes down some of the time so that we can know when it goes up, because if we didn't know when it went up, it would be like being in a space where everything was light. There'd be nothing to write home about. There would be no black marks on the space, and so it would be like a piece of perfectly empty paper. Similarly, to be in a completely black space would also be a kind of unconsciousness with nothing to write home about, because there'd be nothing would make any difference. So therefore, if you're going to have black, you won't know that it's black unless you have some white, and if you're going to have white, you won't know that it's white unless you have some black.
Why do you keep us all to love one another? Because if we get to that point, there won't be any of these ups and downs. We'll have to know you.
Correct, but that's not a teaching, it's a koan. A koan. A koan is a Japanese word for a spiritual problem used in Zen Buddhism, such as, what is the sound of one hand? And these problems are given to those who ask questions concerning their spiritual development. And sometimes, as St. Paul pointed out, commandments are given not in the expectation that they will be obeyed, but in the expectation that they will reveal something to those who hear them. That was St. Paul's comment on the whole Mosaic law. Yes, sir. What?
We are all God.
Yes.
What of the hereafter? Is there a heaven? Is there a purgatory? Is there a hell?
The hereafter is, of course, now. Because if you will examine it closely, there is no when else than now. And if you want to make hell of it, you can make hell of it. If you want to make heaven of it, you can make heaven of it. Purgatory, purgatory. It's all here. Always was, always will be. What is death? Death is an undulation in consciousness. How would you know you were alive unless you'd once been dead? Yes.
Realize in the same way that Jesus did to go God, why was it unnecessary for him to have material possessions and necessary for you?
It wasn't unnecessary for him to have material possessions. They said of St. John the Baptist that he was an ascetic, but of Jesus, this man consorts with gluttoners and wine-bibbers and comes eating and drinking. And when the Lady Mary poured precious ointment on his feet and anointed him, they said the same thing that the members of the vestry say to the minister today. Why this great expense? Couldn't it all have been sold for much money and given to the poor?
It's a problem.
It is a problem, sure. But you see, in many ways, when you get down to these very deep ethical problems, well, there sure is no easy decision one way or the other. You must look at the problem from the point of view of an artist. Which way of doing this is in some sense greater? It may be better to go off with a bang than with a whimper. Let me see. Yeah. There is no time, my dear. It's always now.
At every precise moment.
Oh, yes, if you put it that way, of course.
You are consciously God as an experiencing unit on this plane of.
Wait a moment, consciously, not necessarily, because that would spoil the fun. If you press button surprise, you press the button so that you forget who you are.
Right, so that you don't always know all the answers to a given problem.
Yes, that's perfectly true. This is called, in the Bible, kenosis. In St. Paul's epistle to the Philippians, he says, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, thought not equality with God a thing to be grasped, but humbled himself, and made himself of no reputation, and was found in fashion as a man, and became obedient to death." And so you get from this the kenotic theory of creation, held by some of the Greek fathers, that the creation of the universe is the self-emptying or self-forgetting of the Godhead. Yes, I think it's your turn now.
How does your concept of creation evil so that man could see could do it is different from the old story of a man beating his head against the wall so you feel how good it is and stuff?
It's really rather like it. Because the universe is fundamentally a system which creeps up on itself and then says, "Boo." And then it laughs at itself for jumping. And you see, every time it does it, it forgets that it did it before. So it never becomes a bore. Yes, the lady in red.
Can you make yourself into a point of consciousness and travel around the cosmos such as Dr. Lilly was speaking of last night in talking about sanctuary?
Yes, but it isn't necessary to travel. The question is, can I make myself into a point of consciousness and travel around the cosmos and see things from all sorts of places? I say, yes, but it isn't necessary to travel. One is already there. In other words, I'm using your eyes where you are, like you're using mine. Just in the same way, my head is not my feet, it uses my feet. The head is very different from the feet. You couldn't possibly say the head and the feet are the same, but they are one organism.
They each have a soul.
Two.
What do you do about boredom?
What do I do about boredom? Press button surprise.
Oh, it's always there.
Yes, always. Yes, the lady in purple here.
You talk about boredom. It seems to me, at least in my own case, and with many people, that one of the biggest problems in life is being forced to earn a living in something you do not want to rather than doing. And I often wonder, is the answer to move somewhere and live on less money and do the thing that I would like to do, or must I resign myself, as many people have, to do the thing that gets me the bread, and then in my spare time, sometimes try to make up for the many days and weeks and years of this kind of how living. What is the answer?
Well, there are two sort of answers, one of which you've already indicated, which is to do with less and do what you want. Which,
When did that, those things, the medical things that we sort of accept as part of life, wouldn't get done.
I think the objection, if everyone did that, is rather like asking what would happen if everybody wanted to catch the 4 o'clock train from Grand Central to Westport, or if all the molecules of air in this room were suddenly to congregate over in that corner, there is a bare chance that it might happen, but very low. Yes.
Would you say we're going around in circles trying to eliminate evil because we never will? It might not be anything.
Yes.
Eliminate it, so we're just playing games.
We are going round in circles. But you see, going round in circles, as you may have observed by looking at the sky, is what the universe is doing. You see, before,
As long as we recognize it, we're all right.
yes. Yes, that's the thing, it's a dance. And when you dance, you don't dance to get somewhere. Yes, all right, but when you wake up, you turn the confusion into a dance. And so I go back to your question. What is the alternative to clearing out of the job you're doing? And to say doing with less but having more fun. Well, there are ways of making almost any activity into a dance. Supposing you have to drive a bus in New York, which is a very harrowing job in the ordinary way, you must not take seriously anything about it. This is the first rule. That it doesn't matter a damn if you don't get there on time, but it would be fun to go as fast as is consistent with safety. And therefore, you swing that bus, and you play things that go on. You take the whole thing lightly, as if it is not serious. And because this is the nature, say, in ritual, when you have a procession. Now, people who don't understand religion don't know how to make the right kind of processions. There are those who go a military march, and they don't understand it because their objective is to get there. There are those who dawdle like ducks, and they don't understand because they're trying to be dignified. On the other hand, there are those who walk as if they had already arrived. And this is the way kings walk. Because a king is the center, and he is always where it's at. Where it's at is where the king is by definition. So, if you work in this way, people who are practicing meditation take up monotonous things for fun. And meditation is supposed to be fun. I hope John Lilly told you that this morning. Where you say you're going to do Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. You know, you can really have a gas doing that. And so that anything monotonous can be treated in the same way. This is one of the ways of overcoming boredom. Because boredom's the great problem for energy. See, energy is always on the go. Yes, sir. Yes, the gentleman in the white shirt. Yeah.
The quality you call mythic sometimes.
Mythic? No. Mythic is a great word. The question is it bother me to be called mythic? No. Myth is very powerful. Myth is fun. Myth is stories told to children. Everybody loves them. Yes, sir. What? Is God omniscient? Well, it depends what you mean by the word. A lot of people think that omniscience is like knowing everything that's in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's not omniscience, that's intellectual elephantiasis. Now, you see, let me explain this question because it's always important. And when anybody announces that he or she is God, people say at once, well, will you tell us in millimeters the height of Mont Blanc? And I say, look it up in the encyclopedia, it's there. The thing is this. What we ordinarily call knowledge is the translation of life into words. And that is a very cumbersome process because If we had to translate the process into words every time we took a breath, we'd never get around to it. It takes so long to describe and think through the whole physiology of breath. Therefore, we do it without thinking about it. And I find that I'm shining the stars in just the same way. I mean, if you want it in words, it's going to take us a long time to get through them because words are strung out in a line.
But I sense that eternally we are, and we are all gods. Our God is gods. We are all gods. Therefore, I am God. How come I find some difficulty in recognizing, understanding, or finding this tranquility within myself?
How do you, if you are God, how do you find such difficulty in finding peace and tranquility in yourself? That's because you're looking for it away from the place in which you are. You are seeking it apart from the experience which you have at this moment. And you are regarding that experience and saying, that's pretty lousy, I'd like something better than that. But the trouble with that is that it splits you in two pieces. And once you're split in two pieces, you're lost. Because you've made a difference between the experience you are now having on the one hand and yourself who is having it on the other. And you wish you could get away from that experience. Now, the truth of the matter is you can't, because you are what you experience. It's a myth purely that there is some sort of experiencer who has the experience. You are what you know, because it is not I know something, there is simply a process called the knowing. You could say the knowing, like the world, has two poles, north and south. And so the knowing ball has the knower and the known, but only in that sense. Now, knowing changes. It changes itself. But if you try to stand outside it and change it, it'll be like standing outside your hand and trying to move your hand from outside. And so comes the difficulty. In other words, this would be the difficulty for God in the press button surprise situation, where you think you want something different from what you have. But if you do think that, you've got to ask yourself the question, what it is that you really want. This is the most fundamentally important question. And you will find, if you go into it very, very deeply, that you have it. Now, you may change your mind about it, but you do have what you want.
So if this place caught on fire, I would find myself so scared that I wonder if I would also feel that I was God, and if I am God and scared, what do I do about that?
Well, one of the ways of not being bored is to scare yourself.
Yes.
Don't we all go to the movies just to be scared? We put certain limits on it, indeed, before we go and say, well, this isn't really going to happen. It's only a play or a movie. And therefore, while we see the safe outline of the proscenium arch, back in the back of our minds, as a sort of Hintergedanke, we know it's only a play.
I'm talking about when it isn't only.
How do you know it isn't? If you see, after all, the task of the actor on the stage is to come on so well that the audience thinks it's real. So that he has them crying, so that he has them shaking with fear, so that he has them sitting on the edges of their chairs. Well, that's just one ordinary Joe Doakes actor, but supposing the actor of the play is the real big actor. Wow, that play would seem real. And so that's what happens when the house cat is on fire. Yes, lady in red. Yes, you're looking behind yourself. What is sleep? The seventh day. What? When is the seventh day? When you sleep. Yes.
Yes, God. The only reason I know that I'm God is because I take the responsibility for it.
Yes.
Does that answer the lady's question about the fire?
Oh, yes, that also would answer it. Yes. It's a question of taking responsibility for what happens.
What happens if you don't do anything about the world?
If I don't do anything about the world, the boredom. Well, that's another way. That's another way. You can explore boredom. You can bore into boredom and watch it. Sometimes when you're bored, that's the only thing to do. Because even for God, you can't lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. Because that is by nature of the definition impossible.
You said you would enjoy having a bit of.
Yes, I think that would be fun. I mean, why else does one go on stage except to make myths? What? Excuse me, what did you say? What is my motivation for going on the stage? That is like asking, why is there a universe? Well, now, if you listened to George Leonard last night, George Leonard explained how children were befuddled by being taught to ask why about everything. Because you always look away from what you're asking about to its antecedents, and that won't lead you anywhere at all. Why am I here? And I answer that question. Then somebody says, well, why that? And then somebody says, well, why that? Why that? Why that? And you get back and back and back, and eventually you get tired of answering. And so fathers, when their children say, why, Daddy? Why? They say, oh, shut up and eat your lollipop. So, but what happens, you see, when we trace the causation of things into the past, it all begins to fade out in silence and no answer. Why? Because it didn't begin there. The universe begins now. It didn't begin in the past. And the past trails back from now like the wake of a ship.
If everything is God and there is no time except now, what is the role of chance?
If everything is God and there is no time except now, what is the role of chance? Chance pairs with order. We'll say randomness, we'll call it, and it pairs with order. And it is part of the nature of order. If you know what you mean by order, you know that you mean contrast with randomness. And if you know what you mean by randomness, you know that you mean contrast with order. So if you want to have order, you must have randomness, and vice versa. Yes?
Did you have this much charisma before you discovered your true nature?
Yes, but it came out in a different way. Yes.
I think there's a sort of danger here, though the riddles are funny, and if you had time enough to think each one through, they'd be very profound. There's a certain danger of everything and everyone being God, because if you've really found yourself as God, then you know that certain things that you, as God, have created that don't personally affect you, you create for a reason, you stay out of them, and you aren't a do-gooder. But if you think you're God, and then you try to go into too much social action and change the evils of this world, you end up hurting yourself and a lot of people, and you're playing God and you're not really being God.
Well, I admit to you, my dear, that this is a very, very dangerous conversation. And that I thoroughly agree with, but we didn't come here, did we, to play it safe? All profound ideas and profound questions are dangerous. It is dangerous to go into science, as we all know too well. It is dangerous to go into medicine, dangerous to go into writing, because the pen is often mightier than the sword. And so I don't think we should withdraw from certain things because they're dangerous. But I entirely agree with you that if I were, as it were, in the spirit of God to go about social reform, I would be failing to realize the construction of my own universe, which is that when you interfere with it, you've got to know exactly how you're interfering. Otherwise, the most amazingly unexpected things will happen. So when people ask for miracles, they don't realize what the miracles involve. I mean, if I turned the microphone into a rabbit, it's altogether possible that you might drop dead, because those events might be connected.
Did you ever study with Carl Jung?
Did I ever study with Carl Jung?
Work with him?
I didn't study with him. I knew him, and I read a lot of his writings. Yes.
notion of watching yourself, watching your boredom, or being aware of yourself implies there's a separation somewhere.
It does in a way, yes. And it depends how you're watching. There is a very interesting thing that comes up in this respect with regard to the Bhagavad Gita and to the Yoga Sutra, where they talk about the witness. There is, as it were, behind our ordinary self with its emotions and involvements, a witness self that does nothing more than perceive what happens. And this is the Atman, or the Purusha, which is not involved. And some of you, no doubt, especially in times of crisis, have suddenly discovered this sort of witness center behind everything that just isn't involved. Most terrible things can be going on, but the witness is impassive. Now, when we go into these states, we've got to be very careful of our descriptive language, because the descriptive language makes the witness seem something apart from what is happening, in such a way that if we want to become really sort of skitsy and catatonic about things, we can always be withdrawn and go in and identify ourselves with a solitary and uninvolved witness, who is merely a hangout for the ego, as when the police raid a house in which there are burglars. And the burglars know they'll be caught if they're on the ground floor, so they go up to the first floor. So then the police come up to the first floor, they're up to the second, finally they get to the roof, or the open sky and the infinite. And in this way, this was why the Buddha did not teach about the Atman, the real self within us, because he knew people would use the real self as a hideout for the ego. And so, when, say, Krishnamurti tries to explain this, he doesn't talk about the witness. He talks about awareness, and people say to him, but who is aware? What is aware? And he seems a little sticky in his answer here, because what is the matter is that the people asking the question are bewitched by grammar. They are using a language in which it is part of the grammatical convention that the verb always have a noun subject. Now, how on earth do verbs get started by nouns? I ask you. How can a thing start a process? Surely, this is really the same problem Descartes was wrestling with when he tried to find out how spirit could influence matter, or how mind could influence body. Because everybody knows that all proper ghosts walk straight through walls without disturbing the bricks. So how can the ghost in the machine, as Kessler put it, the soul in the body, how can it do anything to the body? With no connection. Two different realms. The point is, when we're talking about this awareness, what we call thought, feeling, sensation, emotion, we could say in a very clumsy way is it's aware of itself. It's the very nature. There wouldn't be sensation without awareness. You don't have to have something which is aware of it, any more than you have to have a thing called lightning, which does something called flashing. The flashing is the lightning. And so awareness is the one who's aware of it. Would say this awareness, if I say I am aware, the word I, as William James suggested, is simply a word of position, like this or here. Awareness here. And your awareness there. Yes, sir. Yes, life is like one great koan. No, death is not the solution. It has no solution. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. You see, the thing is like this. This is what is hard for Westerners especially to understand. I said, if you understand the yang and the yin, you don't need to ask any further questions. And all you I Ching buffs ought to know this by now. What is not a component of Western common sense is that nothing is something. Now that may sound a little contradictory, but I think I can explain it. We treat nothingness as if it were ineffective, as if it wasn't really important at all. And yet, when we look out at the night and we see all these stars in space, try and imagine what the heavens would look like if there weren't any space. Then obviously there wouldn't be any stars. I mean, you could think that they would all be jammed together in a lump. There are various objections to that. How would you see the edge of the lump and know it was a lump without space around it? Furthermore, we know when we investigate the constitution of matter physically that at the atomic level there's more space in something than there is anything else. Most of it is empty, and which led a physicist at the Argonne lab at the University of Chicago, who had become a little nutty. He was so impressed with the emptiness of matter that he went around with the most enormous padded slippers in case he should fall through the floor. So now what the point I'm making is this. If space is essential to solid, it's perfectly obvious then that nothing is essential to something. If you can't have something without nothing, it means nothing is pretty powerful stuff. Because something comes out of it. Like that. It's a dogma of Western thought, expressed in the Latin phrase, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing comes nothing. But that's not so. Out of nothing comes something. Now you would say, well, if something comes out of nothing, there must be some kind of mystery inside nothing. It must have a secret structure of some kind. I mean, there must be sort of electrical goings on. This is the trouble they have about cosmology. How could this world generate? Could it just be out of free-floating hydrogen? No, it's a much simpler idea than that. It comes out of real, solid nothing. It's so simple.
You've been listening to Alan Watts in On Being God, delivered in New York City in 1971. It's from our Philosophy and Society series, and to download this and other similar recordings, please visit alanwatts.org. Today's broadcast was brought to you by the Ram Dass Be Here Now Podcast Network. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Alan Watts Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Watts, and today we're going to listen to an amazing recording. It was made in 1966 at San Jose State at a talk on drugs, turning the head or turning on. And to put this in perspective, there was a lot going on at that time. The youth was in full revolt, there was a lot of civil unrest, and the use of mind-expanding substances, generally called psychedelics, was in broad use in the counterculture. It was quite a time. And my father was an early pioneer. A few years earlier, in the mid and late 50s, researchers had approached my father, Aldous Huxley, and a few others, asking them to try these substances to see what their reactions would be. I think they figured that a philosopher or an author would have a better ability to communicate and relay the experiences that people were having with these substances. So at first he tried mescaline with one doctor and got what he described as aesthetically pleasing results, but it was not the full-blown experience that he'd heard about. However, another researcher gave him LSD-25, and that produced what he later described as a religious experience. However, by the mid-60s, it was obvious that the street acid that was going around was not quite the same thing as what he'd experienced in the labs, and he was cooling off a bit on this. A few years later, he would come to say that they could be useful tools, but once you got the message, it was good to hang up the phone. And a lot of this had to do with not just the chemicals themselves, but people's preparation and approach to them. What was called the set and setting, as many of these people were taking them for primarily recreational purposes, and they were very powerful psychoactive chemicals, and that wasn't always the best approach. So in this talk, he really gets into the whole concept of drugs and why we call such a wide variety of substances drugs. And it's a very interesting revelatory talk with a bit of biographic content, but also a very valuable and wide-ranging social commentary on what was going on at the time. I think you'll enjoy this. It's Alan Watts in Drugs, Turning the Head or Turning On.
I suppose that next to the question of racial disturbance, there is no more controversial problem about the domestic affairs of this country at the present time than drugs. The word drugs has a very funny semantic problem. You have a place called a drugstore. Which is perfectly inoffensive and a regular part of the scene of life in these United States. But at the same time, you have a word, drug, as when we say a person is drugged, which means that he is happy, but incompetent, under the influence of heavy medical sedation. We also have another word that should be drugged, I suppose, if we use it in that way, which is called drunk. Because a person, even pleasantly inebriated with alcohol, is just as much drugged as a person might be under the influence of morphine. He is rendered insensitive and vaguely sleepy. Now, I should explain how I came to be interested in the problem which has now become so controversial of the influence of chemicals on the human mind. For many, many years, more than 30 years, I've been interested in the psychology of religion, pretty much as a disciple of William James, who was really the first outstanding psychologist of religion, tried to understand what is going on when people have religious experiences. And he concentrated finally and rather particularly on a certain class of religious experience. There are experiences of visions, which people have revelations. They see Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, Krishna, Buddha, or who have you. But these are, in a certain way, less interesting than the experiences in which the individual has a sudden transformation of his sense of being alive. The These experiences occur sometimes quite spontaneously, to children, to adolescents, or to anyone at almost any time of life. Sometimes they occur as the result of or the apparent result of a discipline, as if you practiced yoga, Zen meditation, or Catholic contemplative prayer. And sometimes they occur as a result of certain ingestions of chemicals. The interesting type of this experience is when the individual is brought to realize that there's something that we'll have to describe from a number of different points of view. The experience itself is extremely simple. The only thing that is complicated is when we start to try to describe it in language. The experience itself, in its utmost simplicity, was once written down by somebody who took nitrous oxide and had a sense of total clarity about all the problems of life. And as he came to out of experience, he had his pencil poised over a sheet of paper to write down what was the real nitty-gritty about this. And he wrote it down. He really got the point. Then when he returned to normal consciousness, he looked at what he had written, and he saw that what he had written was everything in this universe is the smell of burnt almonds. Over which the academic community had a good laugh and said, well, obviously this was a